If you grew up too soon, people probably called you mature. What they rarely noticed was how much of that maturity was fear. You learned how to read a room before you learned how to relax. You noticed tone changes, footsteps, silences, and what they usually meant. You became careful early, not because you were naturally calm, but because being easy made life safer. Some children get to be loud, messy, needy, and unsure. Others start managing the emotional weather before they even understand their own. That kind of child often becomes an impressive adult, dependable, thoughtful, self-controlled, and deeply tired in ways nobody sees. From the outside, it can look like strength. On the inside, it often feels like never fully putting your guard down. You may still be the person who handles everything without being asked. The one who notices what needs doing before anyone says a word. You answered texts, remember birthdays, smooth tension, and keep things moving. Then later, alone, you wonder why love still feels strangely heavy. Because growing up too soon does something subtle. It teaches you that your value lives in what you carry, not in who you are. So even now, rest can feel undeserved. Support can feel unfamiliar. And having needs can feel like bad timing. You might not call yourself guarded. You might just say you are private, independent, or better off handling things alone. But sometimes independence is just old disappointment wearing polished clothes. It is what self-protection looks like after years of practice. People who grew up too soon often know how to function before they know how to feel. They can solve problems fast, but freeze at simple emotional questions. Ask them what needs to happen next, and they are clear. Ask them how they are doing, and everything inside goes strangely blank. Not because they feel nothing, because they learned early that feelings were less useful than control. Maybe there was chaos in the house. Maybe there was sadness nobody named, anger nobody could interrupt, or adults who needed more than they could give. The rule became simple very early. Do not add pressure, do not make things harder, and do not become one more problem. That is how some kids become old in the eyes. They stop expecting comfort and start offering it instead. They become the reasonable one, the low-maintenance one. The child who does not ask for much then grows into an adult who still does not know how. This pattern is often mistaken for personality, but a lot of what gets called personality was once adaptation. Being hyper-responsible can look like character. Staying quiet can look like peace. Never asking for help can look like confidence. But if those traits were built in an atmosphere where being soft felt risky, they are not just traits, they are survival strategies that settled into identity. That is why ordinary things can trigger guilt. A nap feels lazy, a boundary feels cruel, and a need feels embarrassing. Because, somewhere in the past, needing something came with tension. It came with sighs, irritation, silence, or the feeling that you had asked at the wrong time. So now, even kindness can create discomfort. Someone offers real help, and your first instinct is to minimize, joke, or say you are fine. That is one of the quietest consequences of growing up too soon. You become reliable in every room, but rarely feel safe enough to fully arrive in one. You might notice it in relationships first. You listen deeply, remember details, and make people feel understood. But when the attention turns toward you, something tightens. You suddenly feel vague, exposed, or weirdly unprepared. You can hold someone else's pain with patience, yet naming your own can feel dramatic, clumsy, or somehow unfair. So you edit yourself. You tell the shorter version. You say it is not a big deal. And over time, people may know your competence better than your inner life. They trust you, depend on you, even admire you, but do not always truly know you. The child who grew up too soon usually learned that being emotionally manageable kept things steadier, so adulthood becomes full of self-containment. Everything gets pushed back. You cry later, need later, and feel things after the room is finally quiet. There is often a time delay between the moment and the feeling. Not because the feeling is absent, but because your system learned to postpone it. When something painful happens, your first response may be practical. You make the call, finish the task, and stay composed until the day is over. Then hours later, maybe in the shower or the car or at 2 a.m, the feeling finally catches up. By then, you are alone with it. This is what happens when a child learns that immediate emotion is inconvenient. The body keeps the score by becoming efficient first and honest later. Many people who grew up too soon were not only hurt by what happened, they were shaped by what never happened. No one sat with their confusion long enough. No one helped translate big feelings into words. No one made emotional dependence feel normal. A child also needs to be emotionally received. They need someone who notices what is happening inside them without treating it like a burden. When that is missing, the child often becomes fluent in performance. They learn how to be impressive, useful, agreeable, and hard to worry about. And that can work for a long time. It can build successful careers, organized lives, and a reputation for being solid under pressure. But the hidden cost appears in quieter moments, in the exhaustion that shows up when there is finally nothing urgent to manage. If your worth was built around holding things together, then stopping can feel like disappearing. Silence does not feel peaceful. It feels exposing. That is why some people stay busy past the point of depletion. They call it discipline, but part of it is fear. If they slow down, they might feel what has been waiting underneath. The grief, the anger, and the old hunger to be cared for without earning it. A lot of early grown children became adults who are deeply uncomfortable with being seen in need. They can show strength, humor, insight, and loyalty with ease. Neediness, though, feels dangerous even when the need is simple. A ride home, reassurance, a second chance, or someone staying a little longer can all feel risky to ask for. So they become highly skilled at preemptive self-denial. They talk themselves out of asking before anyone has a chance to say no. At work, this often looks admirable. They take on extra tasks, anticipate problems, and rarely make their stress visible. They're the employee who says, "I can handle it." The teammate who becomes the emotional shock absorber without realizing that is the role they always drift toward. And because they perform so well under strain, people trust them with even more. Competence becomes a trap that keeps rewarding overextension. Then one day, they feel resentful, and do not know why. They said yes, stayed calm, and kept proving they could do it. What they did not notice was how often yes meant self-abandonment, how often calm meant suppression, not peace. They can stay through difficulty, forgive quickly, and make endless room for another person's complexity. But being emotionally held can feel almost disorienting. When someone genuinely wants to take care of them, suspicion can rise before gratitude does. Not because they are unloving, but because care once felt inconsistent or costly. So they may test closeness without meaning to. They pull back after tenderness, change the subject after vulnerability, and feel embarrassed after being comforted. Sometimes they confuse safety with distance. Sometimes they confuse chemistry with the familiar feeling of earning their place. A calm, available person can feel strangely flat at first. Not because there is no connection, but because the nervous system is waiting for the usual catch. People who grew up too soon also tend to carry private shame around ordinary emotional needs. They may know intellectually that everyone needs support. But inside, the old script still whispers something harsher. Handle it yourself. Do not be too much, and you should be past this by now. That voice often sounds mature. It is actually the echo of a child who learned to become small in strategic ways. And the tragedy is that this smallness can be rewarded. The world often applauds people who do not take up much emotional space. But easy is not the same as free. Controlled is not the same as healed. A person can look incredibly composed while feeling deeply unmothered inside. They can know exactly how to care for others and still not know how to locate themselves. That is why one of the most painful questions for someone who grew up too soon is often the simplest one. What do you need right now? What do you need in this exact moment when no one is asking you to earn your place? For many people, that question feels less comforting than terrifying, because it brings them face to face with a self they had to postpone. The child who adapted got very strong. The self underneath did not get the same attention. You know how to survive hard seasons. You do not always know how to inhabit gentle ones. You may feel guilty when someone gives without asking for something back. You may tense up when kindness is consistent. You may even feel sadness after good moments, because being treated well can expose how long you went without it. That is a painful truth many people miss. Sometimes love does not only heal. Sometimes it reveals. It reveals the years you were praised for coping, the years you looked fine while quietly disappearing into responsibility. Growing up too soon can make you seem emotionally older than everyone else, but that early oldness often came from skipping essential stages, not mastering them. You may have looked mature because nobody made enough room for your immaturity. You may have looked strong because softness did not feel available. They organized themselves around what keeps connection possible, even if the cost is self-erasure. So no, the answer is not to romanticize how strong you became. Strength built in childhood can be real, but it can also be expensive. It may have helped you survive your early environment, but it can quietly rob adulthood of spontaneity, rest, honesty, and ease. You were trained to ask for little because it made life more manageable for the people around you. There is a difference. You were not naturally detached. You may have simply learned that closeness required self-control. You were not inherently low maintenance. You may have just sensed that your full emotional weight had nowhere safe to land. That matters, because people often build identities around adaptations they never chose. They start saying, "This is just how I am." And patterns can be understood with compassion. They do not need to be rushed, shamed, or turned into one more performance. The goal is not to become less responsible overnight. It is to notice where responsibility has replaced relationship with yourself. It is to notice when competence becomes camouflage, when calm becomes absence, when giving becomes the only way you know how to stay connected. It is to understand that self-silencing is not the same as peace. Emotional restraint is not always wisdom. Sometimes maturity is not being the least needy person in the room. Sometimes it is letting your own humanity stay visible. That may mean tolerating the discomfort of asking, letting someone help before you feel fully justified. It may mean resting before collapse, speaking before resentment, feeling before the delayed wave turns into numbness. None of that makes you weak. It only feels weak if your earliest version of strength was built around deprivation. And maybe that is the real cost of growing up too soon. You become excellent at carrying life, but unfamiliar with being carried in it. You learn how to protect a room, manage the mood, and keep moving, but not always how to come home to yourself. Still, the fact that you adapted so early does not mean you must stay adapted forever. The role that protected you is not the whole of you. There is more in you than the calm face, the helpful hands, and the habit of saying, "It's fine." There is also the part that deserved more gentleness than it got. Because maybe you were never too mature for your age. Maybe you were just a child who learned to survive by becoming easy to need and hard to notice. If that is true, then your adulthood is not asking you to become someone else. It is asking you to stop confusing old survival with your deepest self. To stop calling self-erasure independence. To stop calling exhaustion strength. To stop calling emotional hunger weakness. You grew up too soon because something in your world made that feel necessary. But the person you are now does not have to keep proving the same lesson. You are allowed to be complicated now. Allowed to need, to rest, to speak, to take longer, to not hold everything together. It was how much you carried while still remaining deeply capable of love. Now the work is learning that love should include you too.